Good afternoon to everyone. So we are the Group 4 and we are here to present to you the pros and cons of utilitarianism. But let me first introduce myself. I am San Miguel V. Mamuyak and I am the one who is in charge to discuss to you the pros of utilitarianism. So let us now proceed to the first pros of utilitarianism. The first pros of utilitarianism is it is the utilitarianism primary focus on the satisfaction of society. The main reason that makes the utilitarian theory famous is based on the fact that the theory bases its primary focus of existence on the contentment of society. It's vital to note that the people's happiness is based on their access to financial resources and employment, and utilitarian offers an option to this type of issue. According to, according to utilitarian, the contentment of those people can be obtained by mainly emphasizing direct actions. For example, we could decide to improve the unemployment rates, and the other hand, improve the household incomes. By doing this, we could be looking at the effects rather than the process of result. So let us now proceed to the second theory or the second pros of utilitarianism. The second one is the utilitarianism can be easily implemented because in a society that functions with utilitarian foundation, contentment is the only process to focus on its implementation. The process involves getting into a specific larger group in that society and then working with them to control the positive and negative results of each choice's performance as dictated by the principle. It's vital to note that the decision-making process is straightforward in any society since it's something that everyone does from childhood to adulthood. Thus, understanding the negativity and positivity of particular decision, on the other hand, incorporating the theory into society still is a natural, recurring step. So let us now proceed to the third pros of utilitarianism. The third one is that utilitarianism is a secular system that is mainly centered in a humanity. When looking at our lives from a societal perspective, our day-to-day activities and our vision of spirituality are the most significant struggle in our day-to-day activities. According to several resources, it is estimated that more than 4,100 religions are being practiced across the globe. It has brought a great controversy in our beliefs, significantly differentiating scientific and religious beliefs. All the arguments would be easily eliminated if we place all our oral decision on contentment alone, eliminating the inconsistencies when focusing on supernatural deities from individual perspectives. So let us now proceed to the fourth pros of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism seeks to achieve the greatest good for society. Everyone today dreams of a perfect world with equal opportunities and happiness. But this goal is impossible with the numerous differences within our subgroups. Nevertheless, with the utilitarian principle, which is mainly based on the more significant part as a group for pleasure rather than everyone, we may bring maximum joy levels into our lives. Based on the fact that this theory may pursues ideas that bring maximum levels of pleasures into our lives by limiting the potential of harm occurring in our families, communities, and the overall culture. So the fifth one is that utilitarianism teaches us that it is wrong to harm other people. According to this utilitarian theory, our clarity of morality is based on the general community's perspectives rather than the individual outlook. It also gives the individuals a platform of airing their opinions which are discussed by the city before being accepted into society. It means that the whole community before or the whole community cannot agree to a wrong choice because it makes you happy. It will only agree to ideas and approaches that makes the city and an entire happy but without harming other people or violating others' happiness. And let us now proceed to the 6 pros of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism sheds light sheds lights on objectives that offer a universal solution. The incorporation of objective manners and universal morals shows that the utilitarian theory offers a promising goal of a principle to provide solution to many of society's problems. The actions taken by each group can be accurately measured by the repercussions or the outcomes of the application of similar activities in another company, thus allowing us the liberty to establish independently what is right and what is wrong. From moral and ethical perspectives, it's vital to note that using this principle to apply choices across human societies brings out similar outcomes. That's for the pros of utilitarianism. So let us now proceed to the cons of utilitarianism, which Shaika Nightingale Itaga will present.
All right, so let's talk about the cons of utilitarianism. So, so let's talk about the cons of utilitarianism. Firstly, no other elements besides happiness. So technically, as long as a person is happy under utilitarianism, this is ethical. Next, it creates an unrealistic perspective for society. We question some case-to-case scenarios wherein under utilitarianism, this is ethical. However, this is questionable because it doesn't seem to be ethical. Third, utilitarianism can be unpredictable. Yes, it's unpredictable because sometimes there are perspectives for utilitarianism that we didn't expect it to be ethical. However, this is ethical under utilitarianism. Fourth, relies on people making consistent decisions. As long as the person is consistent with his decision, this is ethical under utilitarianism because on the perspective of utilitarianism, you're not creating any unnecessary thoughts since you're making consistent decisions. So technically, utilitarianism relies on people making consistent decisions. Next is that utilitarianism relies on multiple definitions of happiness. Yes, again, utilitarianism relies on happiness. As long as person is happy, this is ethical. 6 creates the majority rule through tyranny. It doesn't seem right sometimes. However, this utilitarianism creates its own value, or as long as it is right to utilitarians, this is ethical. So there you go. There are the cons of utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism on same-sex marriage is when different people allowed to live separate lives, direct benefit over the indirect harm, perceive general benefits and advantage. All human actions are motivated by a wish, meaning the best way to live is by pursuing our own good in our own way, so long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede their efforts to obtain it. With that said, from utilitarian standpoint, allowing same-sex couples to pursue their own happiness through being able to marry their partner increases their utility and capacity for achievement. There is no valid argument that says that letting homosexual couples marry will keep the heterosexual couple from being able to either marry or obtain their own happiness through that union. Utilitarianism and death penalty. For you to not misunderstood the utilitarian approach on death penalty is kind of consequentialism, as it is often said to be progressive or favoring development. In contrast, if you are talking about retributivist, it sees death penalty or capital punishment as backward-looking. To clearly emphasize utilitarian approach on death penalty, it sees this punishment as justified only if that amount of punishment for murder best promotes these three, which is the total happiness, pleasure, and well-being of the society. This means that the utilitarian approach is justifying capital punishment, which appeals only to the consequences or effects of death being the punishment for serious crimes like murder cases. If this principle or doctrine explain how the action of capital punishment are right because it is useful or for the benefit of the majority, then this theory has its consideration. Considerations of utilitarian approach. Best consideration that the utilitarian approach relies on, what are in the principle, is the empirical consideration on incapacitation and deterrence. To further explain these two, such crime prevention through incapacitation and deterrence, the total effects of death, whether good or bad, for the offender and everyone else, it must be greater than the total effects of alternative penal responses to serious misconduct such as incarceration. If we're talking about incarceration, here we're talking about imprisonment. And for the other consequential considerations, by the way, empirical consideration is part of the consequential consideration I just emphasized because empirical is the main consideration used in this theory. So in discussion of consequential considerations of capital punishment, it is the deterrence that receives much of the attention for those exploring a utilitarian approach to the moral justification of the practice. For classic utilitarian approach or thinking, another important consequences of punishment is its effect on the offender in accordance of Jeremy Bentham, is its influence on his will, which the penal aim of reform may suggest capital punishment is not justifiable for any crime, but that's not to be the case, which this argues that proper punishment for criminal misconduct on its power to improve the life of the defendant, and that is utilitarianism on death penalty.
Divorce. Under the utilitarianism theory, the utilitarianism holds that any act that hurts physically, emotionally, or psychologically one's partner, or hurting your partner and your children, would be considered morally wrong and unethical. Utilitarianism requires the evaluation and analysis of its impacts in terms of costs. So, the best decision is the one which delivers good result sa nakararaming tao. So, actions are ethically right if all people who are likely to be influenced by the consequences gain the greatest good. So, actions are ethically justified if they have the capacity to result in the greatest happiness among all people. So, this includes that hindi lang dapat ikaw yung masaya. So, you have to consider the people or you have to deliver the majority of the people. So, in the context of divorce, it emphasizes the significance of evaluating divorce decisions to ensure that they do not harm parties through the consequences of the decisions made. So, the significance of evaluating divorce decisions to ensure that they do not harm parties through the consequences ng decision that they made. Such decision is to divorce. But under the Christian theology, religious perspectives, divorce is seen as an ethical practice. The Bible provides an understanding of the issue of divorce. But on the other hand, from the teachings of Jesus Christ, there is no suitable time when one should consider divorce as an ethical decision. And some nations do not permit divorce. Of course, such nations include the Vatican City and our city, which is the Philippines. Here, in utilitarianism, the utilitarianism constitutes an important perspective for determining the ethicalness of divorce. So, for example, one knows when he or she is breaching marriage vows, but only guesses the implications of divorce. Thus, domestic violence or any other divorce causes that have negative emotional, Physical, mental, and psychological implications for the parties to a marriage make divorce ethical. So, as what we said earlier, divorce, the practice of divorce in religious view, sa mga Christian perspective, divorce is unethical. But sabi ng utilitarianism, if um, divorce may lead to increased pleasure and a reduction of emotional, physical, and psychological pain, it is then morally ethically right. Therefore, bilateral divorce seems okay and it is ethical considering that the partners will have to arrive at a collective decision that their decision of divorce is the best thing for everyone involved in the marriage, including children. As what we said kanina, na the utilitarianism holds that any act that hurts physically, emotionally, or psychologically is morally wrong and unethical. So if the root of your divorce is domestic abuse or violence, then utilitarianism, then the divorce is ethically right. It is morally and ethically right. Next, legalization of recreational marijuana. Happiness is considered to be the only thing that has immoral value. In utilitarianism, happiness is defined as a state of pleasure without pain, and the opposite of happiness is unhappiness. The opposite of happiness is unhappiness, which is the opposite condition. And this approach considers not only individual good and welfare, but the public one as well. In utilitarianism, or from the perspective of the utilitarianism theory, the legalization of marijuana is more likely to be treated as an ethical matter. According to utilitarianism theory, the legalization of cannabis is completely justified in a sense that it produces good for the smoker. So, to understand more, let us give the application of this or the example. A person's desire to smoke marijuana is not immoral and is right if in result he or she receives the expected effect causes no harm to herself or others. Like you smoke marijuana for the recreation because you wanna get relaxed and happy. So in this case, marijuana usage cannot be viewed as immoral. From this perspective, smoking of marijuana is right because it promotes happiness. The smoker becomes pleased, relaxed, and happy. That is why marijuana is called a recreational one. And ultimately, it is not intended to cause any harm. So, if the idea of the future perspective is deliberately ignored, then legalization of marijuana is justified by the satisfaction a smoker gets from the process of smoking and is completely right.
I am Renzel May Cabasa and I will be discussing the utilitarianism approach on mandatory COVID-19 vaccination. Given now that we have a limited amount of vaccine and many people who could benefit from it, how should we decide who get it first? How do we achieve distributive justice in this arena? So far, we are using a largely utilitarian calculus, a common organizing principle for public health. We are trying to get the vaccine to people with the highest risk, where the shot will be best improve the health of our population. That means healthcare workers and public safety workers first, then others who have the highest risk from infection, then moving on to those at lower risk. In many places, a health risk is calculated simply by age, starting with those who are oldest, although especially prioritizing those living in nursing homes since they have the greatest ravages in this pandemic. Philosophers call this utilitarian, where the act is chosen that can be predicted to create the most happiness, reduce the most suffering for the most people. With vaccine distribution, we aim to best promote happiness and reduce suffering by protecting health in society overall. The question is not who deserves to get the vaccine first, but who should get it in order to benefit society overall best. The idea is a bit counterintuitive. From this perspective, The ethical reason to give the vaccine first to the people who will benefit the most is not for them, but since by benefiting them, you are best benefiting society overall. Even with such a clear goal, there are an uncountable number of different ways to pursue it. One could prioritize teachers, since it will benefit society so much to reopen schools, and with schools reopened, they have significant risk. One could prioritize other essential workers, such as grocery store employees, others in the food industry, or bus drivers, and etc., since by prioritizing them, you could improve and protect the services they offer. And one could try to parse that health risk more carefully than just prioritizing advanced age. People with certain diseases or conditions may have higher risk than many people older than them. I am Renzel May Cabasa and I will be reporting the criminalization of juvenile or minor delinquents or below 18 years old. The application of utilitarianism on criminalization of juvenile is criticized by Douglas Husak. Douglas Husak begins his critique that the state is justified in enacting whatever set of prescriptions maximize utility. Before turning to critical discussion of the utilitarianism approach in this topic, we should be aware of the fact that because several versions of utilitarianism exist, it is clear that different versions of this approach will emerge as phrases such as well-being and any other possible actions are differently specified. A utilitarian principle of criminalization states that the state is morally right to criminalize the type of conduct if and only if the criminalization of type of conduct is at least as good as any other possible action in producing the greatest total amount of well-being. In other words, if everything else is equal and the total amount of well-being created by criminalizing that conduct outweighs the total amount of well-being that could be created by non-criminalization of that conduct, then it is ought to be criminalized. However, given the immense quantity of published literature in which consequentialist and utilitarian justifications for state punishment of offenders are discussed, most of it very critical in tone, it is surprising how little careful analysis of utilitarian principle of criminalization has provided. So some philosophers just state their utilitarian justification of criminalization and take it for granted that the goal of criminalization is to promote well-being in the society. This happens, for example, in the work of Semester and Sullivan. It is retributivism which resolves who will be punished and how much punishment will be meted. To be sure, utilitarianism is given the task of determining which conduct should be punished. That is all for the criminalization of juvenile or minor delinquents.